Have you noticed there are no parrots in the One Piece series at all? At least not in the main canon. And I had thought about this for a long time, thanks to a very loyal commenter and subscriber, S3P8472, because they said, funny thing, but I don't recall any parrots in the main canon of the story. I've seen them in movies and games, but I don't remember seeing any in the manga/anime. And this is true because One Piece is not without parrot characters, but the parrot characters that we have don't necessarily matter. For example, there is a character named DJ Parrot from the One Piece live attraction Phantom. All right. Again, from a live attraction, there's art of him and he's like a weird puppet, but not in the canon series of One Piece. Then we have a character called the Bald Parrot from the third One Piece movie, entitled Chopper's Kingdom on the Island of Strange Animals. And if you don't recall, that's the one with the weird guy who eats horns a lot for some reason. Okay, we have him again in a One Piece movie, and a strange One Piece movie because it's so early, so doesn't really matter. And then of course we have Bolt from One Piece Film Z, who is a parrot who is the pet of Mobston the Shipwright. Again, from a movie, from more of a canon-friendly movie in Film Z, of whom I hope becomes kind of canon in the future, but again, doesn't really matter. And when you look at the series as a whole regarding bird pets, there are a lot of them, but they are often very spread out. And the only bird pet that takes the stereotypical position of being on someone's shoulder is Hattori, whom is the pet of Rob Lucci. And I don't even know if that counts because he's a pigeon and Rob Lucci's not a pirate. So it is what it is. But it's quite strange that of stereotypical pirate pets, we don't have any parrots in the canonical story. Now, in reverse, and I made this comment to that subscriber, we have monkeys because we have the monkey that belongs to Bohemian Knight Doma, and we have Monster of the red-haired pirates. But that's kind of it. And it's weird that they both take very interesting combat roles. That's odd too. But yeah, I've seen parrots in color spreads. But that's the long and the short of it. You don't really see parrots in the series. Birds are here. Birds are around, just really spread out, like Fuza and Pierre or Piper and Mugen from the New Giant Warrior Pirates. So we have birds, and a very prominent bird pet that I thought was the version of a parrot for the Straw Hats at one point, and could be again in the future, is Karoo, which is why in one of the many videos I've done on this topic, I do think Karoo, oddly, could be a parallel to Emu. And it's super weird thinking about it now because that is the only bird pet that ever gets any characterization throughout this entire story. That's why I lean so heavy into saying that I could buy, I'm not 100% on board with it, but I could buy that Emu is a parrot, and Emu's in-story parallel right now is Karoo, because Karoo is the only bird really in the entire narrative that gets characterization, gets character interactions, has its thoughts and personality relayed through Chopper, which I always thought was a cool point that Chopper could talk to animals and therefore make them characters. But yeah, he's the first significant animal that Chopper talks to, and they have a relationship throughout the series up until Vivi and Karoo leave the crew. So I'm wondering if we get them both back, is that going to mean something for Emu themselves? Because the idea of Emu being a parrot is an interesting one, seeing as how there just aren't any parrots in this series, which is odd that another stereotypical pirate thing isn't in this pirate manga, because the two things that have been left out throughout the entirety of the series are actual eye patches and then of course parrots, because we've had peg legs, we've had hooks for hands, and I think those two concepts are why we have cyborgs in general, replacing body parts with machinery. I think that's what that whole concept kind of comes from, which is why in a weird way, despite the technology in One Piece being kind of dated in places, cyborgs end up coming around to make some sense in a way. So that's why I'm kind of convinced that Ibu could possibly be a parrot. Not 100% on it, but I could believe it. And then, of course, thanks to Chopper especially, we have set the groundwork of animals eating Zoans produces kind of weird results. And Chopper is the poster boy of that. So I find it kind of curious that when Zoans are introduced officially as a concept, we have Dalton, the typical standard human eats Zoan fruit scenario, and then we have a weird one in Chopper, a animal who is eating the human fruit. And I think that's how we get a character like Emu. Now, I'm not saying Emu ate a human fruit. I think Emu ate a fruit that gave them human intelligence, because I don't think that has to be particularly exclusive to the human fruit taxonomy of Zoan fruits. I think when you start talking about mythical Zoan fruits, the world opens up and anyone could eat anything to gain human consciousness and human understanding. So that's up in the air. I've always said there could be a bat fruit, but we'll have to wait and see. Now, talking about this further, it's also quite interesting that late in the story now, we're coming back around to the idea of Zoan fruits being in weird situations, because that was in the earlier parts of the pre-time skip and the later parts of the pre-time skip, but it didn't happen very frequently. Now it's happening in fairly major ways, like with Ragnar, because before we only had Lasso and Funkfried. But in the post-time skip, we've got like weird guys like Smiley, whom, based on their physiology, could basically do whatever he wanted. And now we have Ragnar, who's in a very similar situation in which he can do whatever he wants. And then the idea of doing whatever you want comes to a head with things like, say, Cerberus, in which the main sword doesn't even have to fully transform into the entity within the sword. The entity and the weapon can be two separate beings. So that too is weird. So I wonder how far is the whole bit about an animal eating a Zoan fruit going to go? Because even though that was our introduction to Zoan fruits, that situation too hasn't really happened a whole lot. Because we have Chopper, we have Pierre, Gonfal's bird, who ate the horse fruit. Of course, we have Stronger, who ate the Pegasus fruit. And then we have kind of weird guys like Peckhams, who's more of like a beast man who ate the turtle fruit. So that's around, but it's not super popular. So we'll have to wait and see. Certainly one of the more interesting ones, which is more akin to Emu's situation, presumably, is Onimaru. Onimaru was a fox ate the human fruit mythical type model Oyudo. So that gave him human intelligence and allowed him to communicate with others like Zoro. But he's not like on the same level as Chopper. And looking at Chopper, this whole animal eating dough fruit scenario thing can go a very long way. So it's not unlikely that perhaps Emu is a bird that ate some sort of bat fruit that gave them human intelligence and human intellect. And it seems like, especially with Chopper, once they eat the devil fruit, they almost become a new being entirely, because their entire personality and intelligence is shaped around them eating the fruit. So it's a very interesting concept. But yeah, there are no parrots in the main story. They appear in other works and they appear in color spreads, but they don't appear in the main series, and that is quite peculiar. along with no character having a traditional eye patch. So big thanks to user S3P8472 for bringing that up, because that is an interesting talking point. But if you're enjoying the video so far, hit the like button. And if you want to see more from me, hit the subscribe button, followed by that bell so you never miss a video. In addition to, if you could, hit the hype button because it really does help. And with that being said, give me your thoughts and to your friends about Polypede Works.